afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure to have all of you join us today. In the past few months, our team has had the pleasure to work with the International Testing Agency on a project. And today, it is our pleasure to present to you the ethical perception study on anti-doping programs and the views on the independence of said programs, such as the ITA has themselves.
To give a bit of context for those who are not familiar with ITA necessarily, the ITA is an organization that partners with major event organizers, also with international federations and other sport events, to support and provide services in the fight against anti-doping through programs, through meeting standards of WADA, and among other services as well. So ITA has a strategic plan that was launched a while ago. It goes from 2023 to 2026, and it has 6 pillars. Within these 6 pillars, there's one that was linked to our project, which was increased credibility for the fight against anti-doping. As a pillar, that one has many initiatives. One of them is gather evidence and support through data to understand the value of independence in the fight against anti-doping.
Okay, so according to that strategic plan, we have the following objectives for our project. The first one was to conduct an in-depth survey to athletes, athlete support personnel, and others that are in this environment. The second one was to understand the value of independent agencies like the ITA. The third was to identify the knowledge gaps and misconceptions regarding anti-doping efforts. And the fourth was to understand how respondents receive and consume information and education about anti-doping. And lastly, we want to propose database recommendations to improve the perception and the credibility for anti-doping and ITA.
Yes, so talking about the methodology, the first thing you can see on the left side, the process of the study. We prepared an online survey with a mixed method approach. This means that we combined quantitative and qualitative questions. Then we prepared the data analysis to obtain the findings and propose the recommendations. On the right side of the screen, you can see the survey design. So we had 3 different approach variations. We had the athletes, the ASP, that is the athlete support personnel, and other. So we prepare different variations depending on the survey. For each of them, we had 5 different survey clusters, so 5 different groups of questions. The first one was the demographics, then thoughts on anti-doping, ITA knowledge, experience, independence, and independence perception. In total, we had between 50 and 52 questions, so this depended on the approach variation, 50 for the athletes, 51 for the ASP, and 52 for other. And then we sent the online survey through a QR code that was served through ITA, through the organized education webinars, and then through the IOC Athlete 365, ITA-linked federations, and other athlete groups.
Okay, so once we run the survey, we use the platform Typeform, and as Adri mentioned, we run it through a QR code, and we got 281 answers. From that answers that we got, you can see in the graphics, we got 30% of athlete participation, 42% of athlete support personnel, and 28% from others. And you can see that the others are part like family, friends, sports management, federation, and administration. And we would like to highlight that part of those athlete support personnel, 58% were coaches. We would like to say that regarding gender, 33% were male, and 33% were female, and 66% were male. And the average age of the participants was middle age, between 25 and 49 years old, from over 94 nationalities, which was very interesting. Also, we could see in this graphic the highest level of competition that our participants have reached according to the roles that they have been involved. So it was 23% participants that were in an Olympic and Paralympic level, 24% for world competitions, 12% for continental competitions, and 30%, that was the highest, for participants competing in national competitions.
So starting with the conclusions of the clusters, the first one was the thoughts on anti-doping. And we asked the different respondents the first words related to anti-doping for them. And they answered these three main words that were clean, fairness, and health. Secondly, we asked them the level of trust and essentiality of the anti-doping system. And here we came up with an important conclusion in which we saw that on a scale from 1 to 5, they rated as 5 the essentiality by 75% of the population. And for the trust, they rated as 5 the 43% of the population. So for the respondents, the anti-doping system was much more essential than trustworthy. Then regarding the measures to protect the athletes, it was insufficient. The measures were insufficient for 60% of the respondents due to these three conclusions we came up, and were the ineffectiveness of testing, the lack of education and awareness, and the accessibility and the resources. So after this, we have another important conclusion because we proposed different measures to the respondents to see how effective they saw them, and the respondents had to answer them as very effective, relatively effective, or not effective. So here we have a classification of the very effective answers, the very effective measures proposed. And here you can see the classification of the measures. Firstly, you can see the mandatory education prior to each event. So it was the most popular measure we proposed, and then the least popular measure was offering more samples collected, but only for storage purposes.
Okay, cluster number 2 was about knowledge about ITA, and in these clusters, the respondents were asked either direct questions about knowledge itself, for example, do you know about ITA? And also statements where they had to respond true or false to the roles of ITA, okay? And not only ITA, but anti-doping agencies. In this case, we saw a 63% of recognition about ITA when they were asked directly. And within that 63%, 79% of the persons responding knew the roles of ITA correctly. So that means that when they were responding all the time, the true or false, they were right. But we also saw some outliers, and this is very important for the insights. First of all, athletes and coaches, which are the closest to sport being done effectively, they were scoring lower than the average with only a 40% recognition on ITA. The same we saw with younger age groups, where only 33% of underage respondents knew about ITA or the roles that they were presented.
Okay, in the cluster number 3, we wanted to ask people, like, tell us about your experience and how have you experienced anti-doping? By education or by programs that you have joined, or by being tested and being in competitions. So we asked several questions, and out of this, we would like to highlight that 64% has received anti-doping education and 26% did not receive anti-doping education. And we would like to highlight that the participants that have not received anti-doping educations are from developed countries and also from young ages, like athletes that are starting their careers. So probably they are also getting familiar with anti-doping. Also, we would like to say that the sources that they are getting anti-doping information and education, the highest with a 29% is WADA. ITA, our client, has a 18% and 21% for national anti-doping organizations. And we would like to highlight this because, as we mentioned in the demographics, many of the participants are competing in a national level. So this could be the connection. On the other side, we would like to highlight that in this cluster, we also did some statements regarding anti-doping and how they have experienced, they have been tested, and find out like, how do you feel, how do you agree or disagree with these statements? And we would like to say that 90% of the participants trust in the current anti-doping program. 63% agree that there is an equal sample collection between athletes within their sport and other sports. 65% believes that the sample collection is safely handled from the moment that gets out of the body and goes to the laboratory and do all the checks. And 68% thinks that they can go to the national anti-doping organizations to get answers regarding anti-doping and solve any doubts about it.
Currently, there are three main ways that anti-doping systems can be managed. One, the international federations themselves can manage it on their own. Number two, there can be an integrity unit that manages this separately. And the third choice is our main topic, an independent agency such as International Testing Agency themselves. In this survey, we posed this question: if you were to choose between three different management styles, which one would you prioritize? As we can see, that almost 60% of participants specified that they would put independent agencies to manage their anti-doping system as #1 priority. The similar statistics was observed here. 58% of people reported that they would trust independent agencies in general. Now, there's even more people that reported they would trust ITA in specific. However, it is also interesting to point out that even though individuals do highly understand the importance of independence in anti-doping system management, when we asked them to express their confidence, their level of trust, their level of confidence, it is relatively lower than their acknowledgement of the importance. This suggests that they understand it should be done, however, they believe it can be done more efficiently. Now, at the end of the survey, we allowed individuals to provide us with direct feedback on how they believe anti-doping systems can improve in general as a whole. Many individuals targeted education. This is specified in increasing the number of educators and also increasing the quality of said education. Many also suggested to increase the level of testing rates, mostly in competition. And others suggested to implement good governance strategies to prevent corruption and fight against corruption. It's interesting to also point out that 9 individuals in particular mentioned that the use of independence in the management of anti-doping systems will greatly increase the quality of anti-doping in general. And some of those individuals even specified the use of ITA. In order for the sporting community to eventually come to a common understanding in anti-doping matters, a high level of knowledge and trust has to be achieved. Individuals who are knowledgeable and familiar with certain entities are more susceptible to their influences. Therefore, it is highly encouraged that ITA should increase their familiarity in the areas of their future stakeholders and their targeted stakeholders. To increase knowledge is to increase understandings. The more one understands about the procedures of ITA and about anti-doping in general, the more they can align their own values to support the cause. Lastly, only with a level of knowledge can there become trust, and only with trust can there be credibility. In order for ITA to maintain this trust, they need to ensure a level of transparency and ensure that the stakeholders feel like they're being heard and that their needs and their opinions do matter. The fight against doping is a long and complicated one. But our study has shown that the sporting community not only understands the complexity and the importance, but also they know the different types of management styles for anti-doping systems. Not only that, they highly encourage and prioritize independent systems. Although we have observed that athletes in particular are very, very skeptical when it comes to trusting systems, this is due to the fact that they're most likely to be directly impacted by said systems. They have, however, at the same time, pointed us towards a very clear direction of their concerns and a route for improvement. We believe that with the implementation of the recommendations and the consideration of these feedbacks, the future of ITA is only going to be gaining in importance and credibility. We would like to take this time to acknowledge and thank the AISTS team, as well as, of course, our dear ITA team, for the opportunity to participate in this project and for your ongoing support throughout the months. Of course, we have great gratitude towards those hundreds of participants who gave us our insights in the topic. And last but not least, thank you all for being here. It has been a pleasure. If you have any questions, please do ask. We'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for the team. We'll now go through a round of question and answer for about 20 minutes. And as usually, we start by the client. I don't know, Gianluca or the team, if you have any question that you would like to kick off with, and then we'll move on to our jury.
Thank you very much, Julian. I'm happy to start, and then your also my colleagues. Well, first of all, we would like to take this opportunity to thank the team for the work, for the efforts that you put into the project. One aspect that we would like to hear a bit more from you, and it's one limitation that was also mentioned in the methodology, is around the sample, so the number of respondents that we managed to achieve, which is something that, of course, I guess, influenced the project. So I would like to hear from you, how do you think it affected the outcomes of the study? And also, if we were able to access to a broader pool of respondents, how do you think these additional responses could have affected the outcomes?
Well, I'm gonna respond this question about the methodology. Well, we had 281 respondents in total. We were trying to have 1,000 respondents at first, but with these respondents, we got answers from different groups, from different athletes, athlete support personnel, and other respondents, and with a detailed analysis we did, we approached, or we approached this limitation, and we could do a good analysis for the survey, although we obtained fewer answers than we thought we were going to acquire at first. And with this, I don't know if I'm answering 100% your question, or.
If I may add a little bit onto what Adrian was speaking, it's true that we were hoping for a wider range of participants. However, due to limitations, in our opinion, we found that it was not just the number of participants that affected our studies. It was the fact that most of these participants came from one specific channel, which is the ITA webinar. This definitely skewed the statistics a little bit, in a sense that those who are present and were able to reach our survey are those who already have a tendency to seek for information. So that definitely would have changed the results a lot more if we were able to reach individuals that don't actively seek to be a part of webinars, for example. Yes, perhaps their level of knowledge would be a lot lower. Their understanding of ITA as well as knowledge of ITA would be lower. their general understanding and support perhaps would also vary.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you want to bounce on that response.
No, I think it was very good. Thanks.
Members of the jury, is there any question for our group?
I'm sure Boris has one. As all many experts have a lot to say on this.
Thank you for the presentation. I was quite interested in reading the report, and I loved to hear that the respondents think that education is important and especially mandatory pre-event. And so just for the anecdote, this week I'm traveling to an international sporting event, and last week one of the federation staff sent me a mandatory update of my anti-doping education. So I had to spend 1 hour to do a quiz on anti-doping, yet I teach anti-doping regularly. So I didn't get 100% correct because I misunderstood some questions, which tells you something about such things, right? And, you can misunderstand words and everything. So it's imperfect. But I think as much as I was annoyed, it is actually a good thing. But I'm surprised that the respondents think that this is, one of the most important things to do because everybody's annoyed at doing that. Did you have any qualitative sense on those discussions? Because you had some interviews as well.
Yes, I wouldn't. It's not exactly interviews, but however, when it comes to this slide, so here we see that the number of people who suggested certain things. Now, these were paragraphs. These were open-ended questions and open-ended suggestions. And we broke them down to specific categories in order to be able to observe the differences in their opinions. So here we saw a different level. On here, it's only the tip of the iceberg. What they gave was much more in depth. They not only provided what they believe they should be done, but also the reasons why. And their personal experiences, why they felt this way. One time this happened, therefore I feel this and that, this and that. So that was the more qualitative data that we had. Yes, that was I believe that was the main one. And on top of which, they also gave feedback on the strategies on cluster 1, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think just connecting what you were mentioning in the cluster number 3, like tell us about your experience. It's funny that they also mentioned, like, what do you think when you hear the word anti-doping, not in the first cluster, regarding the experience. They were saying that it was stressful, annoying, tiring. So it's funny that it causes all these thoughts, but at the end, they really need this education. So I think it's also to change that misconception or that gap that is annoying and stressful, and it could switch that to better things regarding anti-doping efforts.
So to continue a little bit on that, what connections can we make between these measures that could be important and education is part of it and testing rate, and then the trust, which seems to be fairly low, or I don't know, what do we have? We have 35% who believed, for example, handling is not secure, or etc. So there's an issue of trust. So is it because there's not enough education, or is it because of other powers? Difficult question.
Well, it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Good question. Sure. It's a complex question indeed. We've also taken our time to, whenever we see a qualitative answer like this, we kind of zoom out and see this individual, what else did they respond? And usually it's relatively consistent, but at the end of the day, we found that when they do have, whilst they do have some suggestions on how to improve and show dissatisfaction on particular things, the general satisfaction seemed to be a lot higher than the individual things that they're analyzing. And our view on this is that they're trying to provide some sort of feedback to us in any sort of way, because one of the things that we also saw, another trend, is that people want to share their opinion. They want to show you how they think, and they want to influence the creation of the procedures, and they want to influence through their opinions on what they feel like is being done well. So they're more critical when it comes to, if I said this is good, that means nothing is going to change here in specific. But when it comes to the same individual, when we ask them a more general question, do you believe in, do you trust in ITA, for example? Do you believe that independence is important? Do you believe in anti-doping systems in general? They usually still are quite positive. So that is, that would be my response, although it's a little bit, putting the camera on a wider angle, but we cannot ignore all the other context when we're speaking of one specific negative response.
Yeah. And also I would like to add that regarding those negative responses, we try to follow up, like, where is it coming from? And also we found like a pattern that these negative answers were coming from countries or participants that were developed countries or very young people that they are getting to know this, or maybe because they were putting like, there was an answer that they have a bad experience, and according to that specific experience in one competition, it twists all his thinking about the system. So it was very like spotting like patterns in the whole survey.
No further questions.
Professor Royon, Professor Bertke?
Yes, okay, please, okay, thank you. Yes, thank you very much for your report and your analysis, which I found very interesting. It has been a very important work. However, when I reach the end, I get to the conclusion and the recommendation. I found your recommendation, I wouldn't say short, but not really actionable. Actionable means our friend here, they have to do something after this study. And in your recommendation, you don't really have any, I would say, you don't really have an action plan. You have more broad recommendation on 3 dimensions. And I'm looking for, if you had to do one thing, one important action or one important initiatives that, what is a strategic initiative? It's something that you do that you can hardly revert, and it's supposed to have a lot of impact. What would you tell these people to do? A big strategic initiative to...
Oh, thank you for the question. It's indeed been discussed a lot, and it's not only a coincidence. We discussed it with the client in advance, which kind of recommendations they were expecting from this project to move on from like the day we delivered the presentation and onwards. And we agreed that it would be better to keep it in a more general spectrum, to decide them with the information and with the data how to proceed. However, we also had some comments and we also had some conclusions that we thought that it would be helpful. And to answer your question, the main idea that we agreed is to have a certain level of mandatory education for athletes and coaches to be able to compete. Like they have certifications to become a coach. Also, they could have certifications to be certified in anti-doping in order to be able to coach. So for us, education, mandatory, was like the best thing to take onwards.
Yeah, but what does it mean? So which action do you suggest? I mean, in terms of to increase the level of education of everyone, athlete, coach, and so on.
Yeah. So nowadays, ITA, there's plenty of
many things, and depending on your means, you can do little or more.
Nowadays, there's plenty of sources of education for anti-doping, ITA webinars being one of them. Also, the IOC has some other webinars through Athlete 365. And what we thought is that even those same webinars, if you, as ITA works with partners or works with alongside with WADA as well and with other event organizers, you could create and work in a new standard required in order to be able to compete. And that's creating mandatory education for the webinars that already exist, that are voluntary.
And to add to that, the webinars are a strong tool that has been proven through the participation of the survey on its own. However, there's also another spectrum of the education that we have to consider when we're speaking of practical actions. is the representation or the lack thereof in certain regions. So in our survey, we realized that in certain areas such as Africa and such as southern countries, they personally reported that I don't know where to go to. I don't know who to speak to in order to obtain said education, said services. Therefore, at the same time as these webinars are in place and being utilized in a way, there should be local representation and a point of contact implemented in these regions that are lacking knowledge, because they're the ones that needs the most strengthening. And then through the webinars, they can connect then the local people to more resources that will bring them more knowledge and more education.
And one more question regarding your responding rate, because you have about 250, 31. When you launch your survey, how many respondents did you expect? Because at the end, 281 is nothing.
Yeah.
It could be a lot if you have if you send a survey to 350 people. 281 would be a very good response rate. But for this type of invitation to respond to a survey, which should cover the whole world and athlete, coach, and so on, at the end it's low.
Yeah, we would like to highlight, like, of course, we were expecting three.
Well, sorry. Yeah.
Let me continue. It's okay. We were expecting, as Adri mentioned, like 1,000. That was like our biggest target and goal, but we couldn't. We launched our survey and we like promoted, ITA promoted, then we found like through the newsletter from Athlete 365 in the IOC. But we would like to highlight that this specific year and this specific period was a little bit hard because of the Olympic Games. So it was a very busy agenda for everyone, including athletes, coaches, and all the people that is around sports. So I think that that was one of the reasons that affect our answers. But I think it's very like, perhaps we got 281. Inside those 281 answers, like there were many data inside those answers. So it wasn't just 281, it was 281 plus times the 58 questions that we did. Some of them were open, close, agree, not agree, true, false. So I think it was lower participation, but good quality in terms of answers.
Okay. But when you speak about good quality, when you see this open question where people have to answer with words that you mentioned at the beginning, fair, blah, 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 do you think it's informative to have this? I didn't find it very informative. Because you have just people, they are, they put the words they have in their vocabulary. And I didn't find it very informative. I thought it would have been better to put words that are clear, non-ambiguous, that say, I didn't find it very informative to have this type of approach where people put lots of words and then you give it to a generative AI to say, what do they mean, these guys? And I don't know what they mean. In fact, when I look at the word transfer, I had the feeling that could have a lot of different meanings.
That's true.
On top of that, you don't have frequencies, so you don't know how many would fare. I mean,
yes, that is a very, very good point. And of course, prior to the creation of the survey, we've thought about this a lot. The reason why we chose in our methodology to do the mixed version where there's qualitative and quantitative is because we did see some value in the open-endedness. We understand that at one side, an open-ended question opens us to complications and misconceptions and misconceptions from on our side. We may have misinterpreted something. However, with this in mind, we've created a survey in a way that I believe over 90% is quantitative, and only a slither of it is qualitative, which means that most of our data that was analyzable, if you will, was taken from clear questions that are almost really hard to miscommunicate. And we've worked with professors that are professionals in research to go through these questions to ensure that there are not a lot of research biases that these can influence. And also, not only will the users not misinterpret our questions, but also on our own end, that we will not misinterpret their answers. So when we do choose the open-ended questions, it's usually to gauge how they feel. It's not asking them specific things. If they said one thing or another would make a huge difference. It was how did you feel? What was the thing that made you think this way? And in that case, if we've limited it to certain things, we are ignoring all the other possible answers that would have been valid if we didn't do the open-ended questions. That's where the value for us lies.
Did you base your survey on survey that are recognized in the field, or did you build it from scratch?
We built everything from scratch, although our inspiration, of course, came from discussions, long discussions with the ITA team to see what they most importantly want to understand. And through that, there was a lot of back and forth, of course, trial and error. We tried on ourselves, we sent it to our friends to see whether or not only are the questions clear, but are they flowing well? Are the user experiences okay? Can we trust the users for answering? Is there experiencing answer fatigue before a certain minute limit hits? So we've taken all of those into consideration before sending out the survey to limit the biases. Of course, you can never eliminate them, but you can alleviate them.
Good team. Maybe we have a question from Marta from the ITA. Maybe you want to.
Thanks a lot, guys, and congratulations on the presentation. Maybe just as a comment on the recommendations, the anti-doping landscape is extremely complex. We have a global regulator, we have implementers like the ITA, we have national anti-doping agencies, etc. So us as a client, we chose to have high-level recommendations because the insights into the system are, again, very complex. And so in terms of, enhancing education and making mandatory, it would be WADA, for instance, to do that. And so knowing that this is so complex, we prefer high-level recommendations from the team so that we can interpret them both on the side of anti-doping, but on the business side of the ITA as well, as we need to. So we saw that one pillar of the recommendations pertains to mostly communications, presentations, communications channel messaging, etc. So my question would be twofold. Regarding public communication, like let's say we would issue a press release on the outcomes of the study, what would be the headline? And the second one would be in our communication to partners, future existing partners to retain them or to access them. What would the messaging for these partners be coming out of the study? As a client, of course, we want to issue something that is actionable for us, and so this would be very interesting to us.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question, and we're happy that you asked for more specifics because there were a lot of thought going behind this. In terms of familiarity, of course, marketing has many different levels, and yet again, in the complexities of business and anti-doping in general, there are a lot of things that needs to put in place. But there's one trend that our team felt was specifically maybe unused yet and could bring a lot of value, which is the utilization of image and story. So people connect the most with people and with a very short, understandable, relatable thing that they can see themselves in. We understand that anti-doping in specific is not exactly approachable to a lot of people as first glance, but it is important to shine different light on ITA so people are more open to further interact with the organization. And that sometimes may mean to almost rebrand and approach it in a different way that maybe doesn't highlight what eventually will be done. For example, the actual education and the actual testing, etc., the technical side of it, but instead highlight the value that people would hold when they leave a certain article. They would remember the story that ITA was able to save something from being wrongfully suspended, or somebody, because of the actions that ITA or some program or sub-program that ITA has done, was able to obtain some sort of opportunity that they wouldn't have otherwise, etc. And that kind of thing sells. That kind of thing is maintained, retains in people's brains a lot more. And in that way, it's a lot easier to reach markets that you haven't penetrated yet. Because once again, just like our survey, most of the individuals who were active in our survey were already active in ITA webinars. So in order to expand that and to create new connections, we would suggest a newer approach, which is a utilization of one character, for example, or one story.
Building on that, I think that really relates maybe in strengthening, making stronger the program of ambassadors that ITA has, because we know the program, we know the ambassadors are there and they are published in the website, but maybe making them more influential, more active, more on social media right now, that is like the key. So really connecting with these people, like reaching those ambassadors that are in these countries, in these regions that ITA is not that strong yet, could be a good approach too.
I'm going to refocus the question, because before we rebrand or change our communication strategy, I'd still like to know what's the title of this press release. What is the main message?
The new message for your clients or partners?
No, for the public. So we issue a press release that's my daily work. You know, I need to digest information and we need to publish something still. So what is the main message of the study? What is the ethical perception of independent anti-doping?
About the study?
Yeah.
I just had a real realization.
Independence is preferred, education is key.
I would approach it differently. There are many different ideas. That would be straight to the point. But I think personally, I like to highlight the positive outcome that the studies show, that most people do care about anti-doping and that most people want independence and want to contribute. So it would be more of the community comes together to advocate for anti-doping regimes and anti-doping independence, something that includes the people who participated and shine a light on them instead of just a topic of our study.
You don't want something dramatic.
Yes, something positive.
To make the buzz, you need something dramatic.
On this, we thank you.
Anti-doping kill.
Sometimes just to work on it during the coffee break. We've reached the end of the time for this presentation. We will invite the jury to go deliberate on the grades.
I had a lot to say.
Next. How you want to say?
Next
Burning question, burning comment.
Okay.
We'll be happy
Next
to
group, same question. Okay.
We'll be happy to receive your feedback on email. So
Don't worry, no.
You have the floor.
No,
We don't continue
we are
on
running
LinkedIn,
out
don't
of
worry.
time.
Yes.